to the point you were making about the question James Rosen asked, and going back to the report about the 16-year-old boy, Guatemalan boy, who died in border control custody. And the report is out of ProPublica, where it appears a nurse was trying to say this boy had a 103-degree temperature, that the nurse said he must go to the hospital. They made the decision not to send him to the hospital. They said they found him dead the next morning. It appears that's even a lie, and that he was found dead by another boy in a cell with him. This is where we are with this presidency. And Mike, it seems to me that Nancy Pelosi is doing a lot more than serving as Speaker of the House. She's filling a void, a leadership void, and a moral void in this country.
By the way, a moral void that evangelicals used to fill.
That's right.
A moral void now that they do not fill, because white evangelicals are more supportive of these policies. If you look at the polls, white evangelicals are more supportive of the caging of children, of these people dying inside of prison. These children, look at every poll.
Concrete cell.
They are more supportive of these policies, which are, I don't care what red letter Bible you have. I don't care. I do not care. Look at the red letters. This is the antithesis of Jesus's teachings. And you can even be a backslidden Baptist like me and know what is happening on our border to these children is the antithesis of everything that Jesus taught. And yet, we have to depend on a liberal from San Francisco instead of evangelicals?
Well,
because
the interesting part of what we've just seen over the last 10 or 12 minutes, the Nancy Pelosi clips, you saw multiple aspects of who she is.
Yep.
You saw Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democratic Party in this country. Forget everyone else running for president or whatever. She is the leader of the Democratic Party. You saw Nancy D'Alessandro with her roots in Baltimore politics, standing on the stage saying, "Don't mess with me." You saw and heard Nancy Pelosi, not an ideologue, but a woman of great compassion and great faith, who is concerned. She has faith in the country. She has faith, obviously, in her own faith, Catholicism. But she lives by a different code than a lot of politicians do. She truly feels for young children. I mean, they ripped 700,000 people off of food stamps 2 or 3 days ago. She is moved daily by the daily level of cruelty inflicted upon this country by the Trump administration. Children at the border, sick children in hospitals, hungry children in America. These are the things that move her. These are the foundations of her Catholicism, her faith, but also her political faith.
I'll make one last point on the substance of what we heard her say a few minutes ago. There's been a lot of question about whether the Mueller report would be pulled into these articles of impeachment or would be narrowly focused on Ukraine. She gave a long speech in there about all roads leading to Russia. She said a lot of people don't get the Ukraine story maybe or why it's important. All roads lead to Russia. So I would take that perhaps as a signal that Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, and and the other Democrats may bring the Mueller report, or at least parts of it, into these articles of impeachment.
Yeah, and really quickly, John Meacham, what's the answer? I mean, why have white evangelicals who, I saw during Hurricane Katrina, were first on the ground. When the Bush administration wasn't there, they were first on the ground. They were there when we were helping in Mississippi and Louisiana. They were there. They mattered. They cared. Why is it that every poll shows that white evangelicals are the ones who support Donald Trump's immigration policies and basically say they don't care about these children who are locked in cages? Basically, they deserve it.
It's the idolatry of power. They've been blinded, in Cal Thomas's old phrase, blinded by the might. Cal co-wrote a book, 25 years ago, maybe more, worried that the religious right, as it became more influential, would lose its bearings and become a self-fulfilling movement as opposed to a gospel fulfilling movement. And I think that for a host of reasons having to do with tribalism, a sense of siege, and a self-importance, a very unbiblical sense that their mission is the most important, their judges are the most important, and they have, I believe, in many cases, they have chosen temporal power over the implications of their more eternal message.
And federal judgeships over children.
Yeah.
You can look through the Gospels.
Totally.
You can look through the Beatitudes. You can look through the Sermon on the Mount. You can look again. Look at all of Jesus's. Anybody offended by what I'm saying right here? Just read the Bible today. That'll be a good thing for you. Read Jesus's words. That'll be a good thing for you. And then match Jesus's words again with these polls that show white evangelicals support this policy more than anybody else. And again, not only the antithesis of Jesus's teachings, but yes, I will say it, the antithesis of everything I saw as a Baptist after hurricanes, after natural disasters, when people believed they were Jesus's hands on earth during these crises. Why are they blinded to the suffering on the border with these little children who keep dying in U.S. custody?
Because they have made a calculation that power is paramount, and it's temporal power. And the psalmist told us to put not thy trust in princes, and they have skipped that part.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.